Please be seated. The gospel reading this morning has two parts. The first is when Jesus says to his disciples, "The Son of Man is to betray into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." This is the second time of 3 times in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus talks to the disciples and presents a foreshadowing of what is to come. And just like earlier, the disciples, his close friends and followers, failed to understand his identity and were afraid to ask him questions about it. Now, there's probably a great deal we can say about this foreshadowing, but we all know the Passion story, so instead I'm going to focus on the second half of today's Gospel. Jesus and his disciples were traveling to Capernaum. Capernaum was the base of Jesus' early ministry, so they went there often. They were probably staying at one of the homes of the disciples. During this trip, the disciples were arguing about who among them was greatest. When they arrived at Capernaum, Jesus asked them what they were arguing about. Now, I think Jesus already knew what they were arguing about, but as any good teacher, he wanted a way to start that conversation. Their response to the question was a resounding silence. So he took that opportunity, gathered the disciples together for a little chat. He started out by saying, "Whoever wants to be first must be last and servant of all." I'm sure that statement must have been as hard for them as it is for us today. It goes against everything they know. If you are great, you have money and power. Or at least you hang out with those that have money and power, hoping some of it would come your way. But Jesus is saying true greatness has nothing to do with these things. Then he continues. He holds up a child and says, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Now, that doesn't sound so bad, welcoming a child. Children are precious human beings. We love them, we raise them, and they can bring great joy into our lives. But that statement may have been a little more troubling for the disciples. In some translations, the word welcome is translated as receives. So it can read, "Whoever receives one such child." At the time when you received an emissary, you received the man himself, and only those with money and power sent an emissary. So in receiving this emissary, you would hope that that would garner favor or status or even wealth. Now, I'm sure children were loved at the time, but they were little more than property. In fact, the word aram in the Bible can mean child or servant. A child has no status or influence. It has no wealth to bestow. And they're going to cost you until they're old enough to make themselves useful, helping out in the farm or in the home or whatever trade the family followed. For the disciples to ensure true greatness by welcoming a child was turning everything they knew on its side. But that's what Jesus does. He takes the current thinking and turns it around. He talks about a different way of living. But sometimes I struggle with that different way of living, especially with this passage where he says, "The first must be last and servant of all." It runs contrary to the way we've been raised. Our culture praises winners. From the time we enter school, we compete for top grades and being the best at athletics. That continues into our jobs, where most career development discussions involve how to get ahead, how to get a raise, or how to get that next promotion. The struggle I have is that I don't think these are bad things in themselves. Great strides in human existence have come around because of ambition. Medical breakthroughs on how to prevent disease and infection have saved millions of lives. Anesthetics that give us the ability to repair our broken bodies with minimal suffering. We are even mapping our DNA. Breakthroughs in science have given us tools that we take for granted now: electricity, transportation, increasing food harvests to feed the hungry, and renewable energy sources. All of these and millions more have been the result of ambition. The struggle is, how do we balance the reality of living with the servanthood that Jesus is asking of us? In the midst of our ambitions, our striving for success, our determination to win the race, how can we be servant to all? Now, I wish I could give you a definitive answer of that, but that's not going to happen this morning. What I can do is give you some suggestions that I came across while preparing for this morning. Now, some of these may sound sensible, whilst others may sound a little crazy. I tried each of them with some success, and maybe one of them will resonate with you. The first suggestion centers around 3 simple words: I love you. The love we're talking about is that same love that God has for each of us. In this scenario, it was suggested that when we start to feel a conflict, thoughts of superiority, anger, disappointment, the list goes on, we stop for a second and silently tell the other person, I love you. The person that recommended this method felt that it reset that interaction with other people by remembering that we are all loved by God. It is a way to see the face of God in other people, and that in itself can change the tenor of the conversation. It can keep anger from escalating and keep frustration manageable. Now, for me, saying those words to a colleague at work or at the person in line at the grocery store, even silently, was a little uncomfortable at first. But I had to remember there are no mind readers, so the other person never knew what I was thinking. And it did change my attitude. The second suggestion was to see others as a little baby or child. Who doesn't like seeing a little baby? They have an innocence about them and have a wonder of the world around them. They are precious human beings that are easy to love. And this suggestion taps into that feeling. Whenever we are distracted by a homeless person, or hold a grudge against a friend who ticked us off, or envy someone more successful than us, or just angry at the person who just cut you off on the highway, try to picture that person as a little baby or child, because it is far easier to welcome that person as a lovable, precious human being rather than someone who can help or harm you, or someone you might ignore or fear or flatter. The simple act of welcoming another person in this way is welcoming Jesus, and in turn, welcoming God. The third suggestion is just ask the question, how can I be successful in this world and still be a servant of all? This may be one of those times where asking the question is more powerful than any answer we can produce. The trick is to be patient and wait for the answer. So how do we embrace the true greatness that Jesus is asking of us in the midst of our everyday lives? Is it silently saying, I love you to a stranger, seeking the innocence of a baby and the love of God in others? Or is it just asking the question and prayerfully waiting for the answer? In the story, Jesus has a child sitting on his lap, and he looks over the shoulder of the child at his disciples, and even further off, Jesus is looking at us. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. Amen.